Welcome to Coruzant Technologies, home of the Digital Executive Podcast.
Welcome to the Digital Executive. Today's guest is Rahul Subramaniam. Rahul Subramaniam is founder and chief evangelist at CloudFix and a board member of the FinOps Foundation. Throughout his career, Rahul has successfully migrated over 140 enterprise software products to AWS. He has applied over 15 years of experience working with AWS services to create revolutionary products like CloudFix and DevFlows that transform how users build, manage, and optimize in AWS. Rahul is also the founder and co-host of AWS Insiders, a leading industry podcast offering no-holds-barred look at the state and future of AWS and cloud computing. Well, good afternoon, Rahul. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Absolutely. You know, Rahul, been awesome. It's been probably about a year now, but you were on the podcast previously, and we're doing a little bit of a video format today. So that's exciting. I love the video format, but typically when I traverse the globe, I have to go to that audio format, as you know. But great to see you again. Great to have you. And if you want to say anything, go for it. Otherwise, we'll jump into the questions.
Well, likewise, super excited to be here. And we can dive right in.
Awesome. Love this stuff. And I'm glad. I'd love to see you in the studio there. But Rahul, let's jump into the first question here. You're here to talk about the benefits higher order services that can bring to a company with company's AWS infrastructure. Can you explain the difference between higher order and lower order services to our audience?
Yeah. So the way I define lower order services is it's the basic infrastructure. Here we're talking about compute, storage, networking, things that you're familiar with when you run stuff on-premise, but they're just the cloud equivalents of those. And here, when it comes to AWS, these are services like EC2, the VPCs that you have, S3 for storage, EBS for data storage, as well as EFS, for example, which is the equivalent of NFS. So these are equivalents of services or systems that you would have on-premise, but they're just available in the cloud and they're managed for you. So this is what I call table stakes bare bone infrastructure services on which everything else is built in the cloud. The higher order services, again, build on these lower order services, but they encapsulate a lot of functionality that is managed for you. Let me give you an example of a really awesome higher order service that I love, and that's DynamoDB. DynamoDB is a NoSQL database, which is completely managed in the cloud. It can scale almost infinitely without you having to manage and figure out how you're going to get all of this working in the cloud. And that's the beauty of it. And you pay literally, I think you pay about $1 per million transactions or something like that. So it is not only more efficient, but it's also very cost effective in the way it is designed because it's all transaction based.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. We don't always jump into the weeds here on this podcast. As you know, this is a tech platform in podcast format, but I appreciate that and really do look forward to some of these other questions here because we're going to dive in a little bit more. Rahul, why do you see so many companies choosing lower order services over higher order services?
Yeah, so I think most companies jump in with the lower order services because of the familiarity. Like I said before, these lower order services feel very similar to the on-premise setup that they have. They have servers on-prem. The equivalent EC2 instances feel pretty similar. They can work with networking at that low level that they were working on in their on-premise systems. So that familiarity makes it easy for them to adopt these lower order services compared to the higher order services. The higher order services require you to rethink how computing works in the cloud. Computing in the cloud is primarily event-driven and designed for a serverless end state. That's not how most on-premise systems are designed. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of these systems were designed to be monolithic. They were designed, to be run on-premise, to be managed a certain way. But the cloud is a completely different paradigm when it comes to the higher order services. And to be honest, the real value of the cloud is only in the higher order services. If you were to just use the lower order services, you'd probably pay just as much or maybe even more. So the real value is in these higher order services, but that requires you to completely rethink how your applications work, how the systems are designed, how they are architected, and how they interact with each other. And that is, I think, something that organizations struggle with right when they get started with the cloud. So just doing a lift and shift, moving to the cloud with these lower order services is way easier for them.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of that. It's, again, rethinking that architecture and how you do business and how you operate and manage those services in the cloud is a lot different for sure. So thank you for jumping into that. And Rahul, we're going to jump to this next question here. And maybe you could share some examples of companies that can implement right away if they're looking to switch to higher order services. And maybe what benefits could they see by doing this?
Yeah, I think here are some very simple tips. Number one is almost everyone, and I'd say well over 90% of workloads that I have ever looked across enterprises, I find that they have a certain period of the day where the utilization of the resources is way less than their peak utilization, right? These are perfect examples to switch over to managed services where you pay for scale, or serverless instance where you pay for whatever scale you use. A classic example of this would be AWS Aurora, which is basically a relational database, which is very similar to MySQL and Postgres, depending on which flavor you pick, in terms of the interfaces and how it operates. But under the hood, it is completely redesigned and re-architected to operate for a distributed cloud environment. AWS Aurora Serverless can scale down to literally one ACU, or the Aurora Compute Unit, and can scale, actually it's 0.5 ACU, I think, and it can scale up infinitely to as much compute as you want. So when you are not utilizing the database at its peak, you can scale down significantly and pay a fraction of what you would pay otherwise. And this way, you can operate your entire database infrastructure way more efficiently than you were doing on-prem. In an on-prem environment, you would basically provision a database for whatever the peak load you were expecting. And for most part, it would remain idle, which is just a waste of energy, waste of resources. So in that way, AWS Aurora, for example, becomes way more efficient. Another example is we have servers that typically run simple web API or simple services that are nothing more than a function called implementation at the backend. If you, instead of running EC2 instances, turn them into Lambda functions, that completely changes the equation. So for example, if you were to take some of the smallest instances and run a web service on it on an EC2 instance, it would probably cost you anywhere from $200 to $500 at a minimum. Instead, if you switch them over to Lambdas, you could pay as little as $1 per a million transactions. And for most, websites or blog posts or whatever, or blogs or whatever application you're running, 1 million transactions is about as much as they would see in a year. Or, that's plenty. And the difference is spending $500 to do that versus spending $1 to do that. So there are orders of magnitude of efficiencies to gain when you switch over to these higher order services like AWS Lambda.
I love that. And that's no wonder they call you the AW Evangelist, because you're getting out some great information. I knew some of the basic stuff you're talking about today, but you're actually diving down into some of the benefits, the true benefits that other technology leaders could certainly take advantage of today. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome. Last question for you, Rahul. Beyond investing in higher order services, do you have any other recommendations for companies looking to get out of the on-prem mindset when transitioning to the cloud?
I think the bottom line with that on-prem mindset is that you really have to dig in deep and get familiar with the event-driven paradigm and event-driven architectures and really understand what the cloud computing infrastructure looks like, because everything is distributed in the cloud. Everything is designed to fail. Everything is designed to have a completely different paradigm around security. It is no longer the physical security paradigm that mostly governed the on-prem setups. Now the paradigms are very, very different in the cloud. Everything around security, safety, around failures, around recovery, around fail-safe systems, all of those have a very, very different operating model in the cloud. So I don't think there is another option but to really embrace the event-driven paradigm, dig in deep and get familiar with it as soon as possible. And then the second thing that I would say is a lot of organizations are focusing a lot on taking their old on-premise workloads and just moving them or lifting and shifting them into the cloud. I think they should focus a lot less on that. In a number of cases, if you're not going to make any changes to your old on-premise applications, let them be where they are. They're probably way more efficient right there. Instead, focus on how you can possibly take the data out of there, move it into the cloud, and then do something new with it. Do something exciting and, something that's different that really cannot be done in an on-premise setup. Like a lot of the new AI stuff that's coming out that needs to operate on your data, really, you cannot do that in any on-prem setup. You really need the cloud computing infrastructure to be able to do that. So I'd say focus less on the old, focus on what new stuff you want to do, and get them working in the right event-driven paradigm using the higher order services instead of relying on lift and shift. Lift and shift is going to be painful. It's going to be long, and it's not going to get you the ROI that you think you're going to get.
Thank you. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Hearing it right from the expert's mouth today. So, Rahul, I appreciate your insights and everything that you've shared today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Brian. And thank you once again for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And we'll talk soon. Bye for now.